The next artist I want to show you is Edouard Manet, and he's probably the most famous of the realists. The reason why is because he really tried to insert realism into the salons of the time. So I've said before that a salon is a room, the French word salon means room, but it also referred to where they showed their art. So if you said to somebody, I'm going to the salon, right, you could be going to look at all these paintings, right? They also had, of course, the salons where they got together and chit-chatted, right, as well. So they love that word, right? They love salons. But as I've mentioned previously, going out and looking at artwork was one of the entertainments of the time because they didn't have movies yet or, a lot of the kind of entertainments that we think about. So one of the things that they would do is go out and see all the artwork being produced, and that was a nice night out, right? Or a nice weekend little outing for them to take. So Manet really tried to insert himself, right, into the salon structure, and we'll talk a little bit about that. This is his really first famous work that he turned out, right? The Luncheon on the Grass, or Déjeuner sur l'herbe, as it's known in French. And when the critics saw this one, wow, were they shocked. They were like, what are we looking at? And the reason why is because of the woman. They were not used to seeing a woman, right, who was not a nude on display for their pleasure. Because she's not. If you really look at the woman here, she is appraising you. She's kind of looking at you coldly, sort of with interest, like, what's your deal? What's going on with you over there, right? And you'll know she's making eye contact with the viewer. If you're looking at the painting, she's looking at you. Normally nudes, female nudes in paintings, they were coy, right? Their eyes were downcast or averted, or and if they were looking at you, it was very softly, very sort of invitingly, the come hither look, right? And here, she just seems sort of bored or appraising or just very matter of fact. And when critics saw this, they were like, I don't understand the purpose of this painting. What is it? Is it just her sitting without clothes? If you think about it, that makes her naked, not nude. So they were just very confused, very startled and taken aback as to what this painting was trying to communicate. And they hated it because of that, because it didn't fit into the mold of what they expected to see. And Manet was really very much driven by this sort of desire to create something that people didn't expect to see. He tried to send this painting to the Salon, the official French Salon, and there was a jury process. You had to go past a jury to get into the show. If you didn't make it in, they'd stamp a big red R on the back of the painting. R for refusé, or refused. So that was the way they said your painting didn't make it in. You get your painting back, and there'd be a big red R on it. Refusé, right? Refused. But here's the fun thing. And it tells you a lot about Manet and his group, right? Courbet, all of them. He said, well, who cares about the official salon, right? We'll have our own salon. We'll call it the Salon des Refusés. So he took a bad thing and made it into something good, which usually works out pretty well for people, right? People usually love this. I always joke that whatever is off limits or banned, you'll probably have more people go see that because people want to know what the scandal's about, right? And that was true, actually. More people went to the Salon des Refusés than went to the official French salon, so ha ha ha, right? But Manet, this shows you his spirit and the spirit of the realists, where they're like, we don't need your official structures anymore. We're avant-garde, right? We make art for our own reasons. We're art for art's sake. We're going to have our own salon. So again, the Salon des Refusés came out of, right, the sense of being refused and then turning it into something else, right? Turning it into something new. Now, if you know your art history, you should know that Manet was actually citing, right, art historical sources in this work. So if you remember Pastoral Symphony, what Manet did that I thought was really, really smart is when critics would get irritated and they'd say, what is this painting, Luncheon on the Grass? Like, what is that painting? I'm so upset by it. He was like, well, I'm just citing Titian. I'm just using the old masters as inspiration. And then he could laugh behind his hand, like, no, I'm not. But, he used a format that people knew. He used a reference point that people knew. He hid behind art history in a really interesting way, which leads us to his most famous piece, which is Olympia. And if you really know your art history, you already know which one this references, but we'll get to that in a minute as well. It's another Titian, right? And you'll notice the woman in The Luncheon in the Grass and the woman here is the same model. Her name is Victorine Moret. And why do I mention this to you? Because again, I brought up that usually when artists use models, they would try to make them unrecognizable or they would skew their features a bit. Manet actually painted Victorine as she looked. So you'll notice when she shows up in the paintings, it's always her. We can always tell it's her. This was another thing that the critics hated. They were like, you're not supposed to actually show us real people, like, and she's nude. Like, oh my God, what am I looking at, right? So to us, this might seem like a minor detail, but to them, it was just, it's just such bad taste, to show the real look of her. They were like, alter her a bit. Don't make her look like her. And so Victorine actually got a reputation around town too for working with Manet in this sort of brazen way, right? The painting itself is a commentary on prostitution and slavery. So Manet is a realist. Again, these realists kind of have social agendas. Courbet, he's showing you works about prostitutes. He has like sort of a social agenda there. Let me show you the reality of prostitution. Manet, he wanted to have a social agenda as well. To me, it makes a lot of sense for a realist to do this, to try to expose the ills, right, of society. And so he said the two animalistic institutions of Europe are prostitution and slavery. So he was addressing both of those animalistic institutions in this painting, right? He was directly saying, yes, I see these two things as bad, and I want to make you see them as bad as well. Like, I want you to think about this for a minute. So he shows Victorine, right, as a prostitute. And this is an important distinction to make. He shows her as a prostitute, not a courtesan. Because if you know the reference point to this painting, you know that it's from the idea of the courtesan, right? And what's the difference? Courtesans are usually kept women. They're kept by one man in very nice circumstances. Prostitutes, they work client to client. And in France at this time, they had brothels. And the brothels were run by the state and approved by the state. So it wasn't something secretive. It was something that everybody knew about. And the women who worked in them like you'd work a shift job. They would work through, so many clients a night. There actually was a cap on the amount of clients that the women could see by the state. It's all very, orderly and measured. And the way that the men would actually, again, announce themselves are through the bouquets of flowers. So we talked about the flowers before and how sorry to have to ruin flowers for you ladies, but, this is how men told their lovers or told their courtesans or told their prostitutes, I'm coming. So the bigger your bouquet, right, the more likely you'd be seen because, again, she had a cap on the amount of hours she could work and the amount of clients that she could see. Again, very industrialized, right? So he takes us inside this brothel to see Olympia, right? But the way he presents her, if you think about the way he presents her, is not the way we're used to seeing the female nude. It's a whole new envisionment of the female nude and what the female nude looks like. First off, people really critiqued Manet's painting skills. They said this is an unmodeled body. She looks like she has this big outline around her. Like he's obviously a horrible painter, He doesn't know what to do with female flesh, right? She's not appealing in any kind of way. She looks like a corpse, a lot of people said. And then people took a lot of umbrage with her gaze, the fact that she's just staring at you in this bored way, and the clasp of the hand over her crotch. The way I view her stance and her gaze, it all says, I am in control of what I sell. Where if you look at other paintings of women shown as a nude, they're usually, again, very light, very fluffy, like very, inviting, come hither. And this woman, to me, looks all business. She's so busy she can't even take off her jewelry or her shoes. She's like, let's go. Let's get this over with, right? I got things to do, right? So, he kind of puts you in this position where it's this icy cold woman we're looking at, which again is flipping sort of the script on what you expect a prostitute or a courtesan to project to you. So he's showing you not what you think of when you think of a woman nude in a painting. He then uses the black maid to contrast that with slavery. He's basically saying these are two types of slavery. And they're both animalistic, and they both are there as institutions because people prey on them, right? People allow it to happen. And he's like, again, we should think about how, we should reject these institutions. We should reject this animalistic nature of these two things. We should get rid of it. And then finally, at the bottom of the bed, you'll see the black cat. And if you know the source material, right, I've been referencing it, Titian's Venus of Urbino, of course, you can see how the black cat replaces the sleeping dog of fidelity. And cats are symbols of treachery. So the way I think about it is Olympia's not there to keep your secrets. She's there to earn her money. And if she has to betray you or be treacherous or what, she doesn't care. She's like, you mean nothing to me. This is my job, right? The courtesan, right? She's there to be a luscious, inviting woman of pleasure for you. So you compare and contrast these two together, and it's like, wow, they use the exact same compositional setup, the same kind of characters, but again, the meaning that Manet is able to infuse into re-envisioning this subject is amazing. And again, it really speaks to realist values, right? That this is how realists would operate. They would say, let's think about the reality of this situation. Let's not romanticize it. Let's really understand what this would be like. So again, I think he uses his works to kind of puncture the balloon of your typical way of looking at something and say, this is the reality. You should confront it. You should understand it. The final artist I want to show you is Daumier. And I showed you Daumier briefly before with his print of La Poire, or the pear, which you'll see again. And I'd mentioned during that discussion in the Enlightenment that, Daumier is technically a realist, right? But I like that print in the conversation of the Enlightenment. But Daumier, again, fits here with the realists. Daumier was a painter, but he also was a printmaker as well. And so this is a print of his that's very, very famous, the Rue Trens Noir. A rue was a street. So we're looking at a street in Paris and the inhabitants on that street. Now, this is a piece that you do need to know the story, or you really can't understand it as much as you should. It stems from an incident that had happened in this neighborhood where the Rue Trens Noir was, where people were out in the street protesting or rioting, right? I always joke, it's really your perspective, isn't it? Are they protesting or are they rioting? It's really about where you stand. I'm not judging, I'm just saying. So they were out in the street, and then soldiers were there trying to contain what was going on, the events. And somehow there was a sniper that shot and killed one of the soldiers. Well, all hell breaks loose. People start to fire all over the place. And unfortunately, the soldiers start to break down the doors and go into the homes along this street. So people that had not been out in the street doing anything, right, who were in their homes, and you'll notice they're in their night clothes, they were sleeping. So the soldiers, they're enraged, right? They bust into these homes and just start killing people indiscriminately. Daumier made this print to say, what injustice? What injustice, this event. But he said, but this is really what happens. This is really what happens to people. It's not fair, it's not right, but it happens. And you'll notice he shows it to you in a realistic way. Where if you go back and look at Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People, you'll notice that even the dead seem posed. It's romantic. Here, it's shown to you through reality. The man has stumbled back and fallen on his own child, right? There's blood, leaking onto the floor all over the place. This is not something that looks staged. It looks like it would have looked. And again, why did Daumier decide to do a print? He decided to do a print because he wanted to be able to make this message travel. And if you do prints, they were cheap, they were affordable, they were easy to get out into the public's hands, and he knew that. So there's a very good reason why he would choose to do this as a print, right, not as a painting, because he knew the audience would be more widespread if he did it as a print. Some of his other prints, of course, you've already seen Gargantua, one of my favorites, where, you feed the king, and he just shits out laws. So again, we're right at the time and the tipping point of the French Revolution here, where everything's about to come to a head, right? Everything's about to explode, and that's going to resolve itself. So Daumier is tapping into that energy, tapping into this rejection, right, of the king. And again, prints like this could be very easily distributed, right, out on the street so people could get their hands on them very, very easily. And Daumier, just like Goya, he was a critic. You know, he wanted to show you the reality of the things that were going on. This is the legislative body, where he tried to really expose the ills, right? And just like Goya say, this is what's not working, this is what's not right. So in this piece, to me, he's like making these little, fat cat politicians, and if you really start to look at them, you'll notice their faces almost look like animalistic. Some of them, you start to be like, are they even human? They start to devolve in front of your eyes, and you start to be like, these are the people making our decisions. Oh boy, right? I don't know about that. But again, he was trying to use his works to show you the real, show you what you should be concerned about, and let you understand that maybe the society around you was fairly corrupt, and that you should be on your toes, right? You should be aware of that.